And staying in Florida now, we are joined by Republican Congressman Matt Gaetz of Florida. Thanks so much for your time, Congressman.
Thanks for having me.
So as you know, your state has seen a surge of new cases and reported a record 132 deaths yesterday, 112 more deaths just today. Some Florida mayors have expressed concern that if the rise isn't controlled in the next few weeks, that the state may have to shut down again. In a radio interview yesterday, it sounded like your solution to the surge in Florida was to, quote, lock up the boomers. Is that really a viable option? And does it address the heart of the problem, which is that the younger people are more frequently testing positive?
Younger people are more frequently testing positive, but we're continuing to see more evidence that young people are less likely to be symptomatic, and they're also less likely to spread the disease. So we should not evaluate coronavirus as equally affecting the young and the old, the sick and the well. We have a lot of seniors in the state of Florida, and so my point was that they need to take special care. Folks like my parents who have comorbid conditions and are a little bit older might have to shelter in place longer than young people who are going to school and getting to work in Florida.
You famously wore a gas mask onto the House floor back in March, seemingly making light of this situation. But the head of the CDC said today, if everyone in this nation would just take on a face covering, practice excellent hand hygiene, and be smart about their distancing in crowds, we could bring this outbreak to its knees in 2, 4, 6, 8 weeks. Do you agree with that assessment? And does Florida need to mandate masks in public? I mean, why not take that preventative measure?
I wasn't making light of anything. It's interesting you seem to ascribe my motives. I think I was wearing a mask before it was chic, before it was cool. I think that people should wear masks when they're in public. I certainly do. In the state of Florida, our governor has empowered our mayors and county commissions to issue mask orders if they so choose. And matter of fact, the governor had a press conference today where he said that if your community has analyzed the data and you've got sufficient community spread to warrant a mask order, we'd like you to follow the orders of your local officials.
So that mask was not tongue-in-cheek, just to be clear, because, I mean, there are simple masks that you could wear without going to the extreme of the gas mask.
Well, as you'll remember, in the early days of coronavirus, public health officials actually said, don't go out and buy one of the N95 masks that our healthcare professionals needed at that time. I happened to have a mask of a different kind, and so I wore it. And the fact that I gave an interview the very same day to The Hill where I said, I'm not making light of this. I'm simply wearing a face mask because it's my belief that members of Congress will contract the disease. Unfortunately, my projection turned out to be true. A number of members of Congress have because of the lifestyles we lead. We shake a lot of hands, give a lot of hugs, and travel through a lot of dirty airports. And so I think I was ahead of the curve, but certainly I didn't want to go out and buy a mask that might have been needed by a nurse or another healthcare professional.
And just because I'm curious, so is that the mask, that gas mask that you wear if you're doing errands just routinely during your day?
No, actually, since that time, we've become far more capable as a country ensuring that we have masks for everyone. Matter of fact, in the state of Florida, we have a stockpile of 10 million masks, 15 million gowns and gloves that are available for our healthcare professionals. So we're in a very different place thanks to the leadership of the Trump administration. So now I wear a mask that's a little lighter, but that was the only mask I had at the time, and so I wore it. But I made very clear in my public comments the very same day that the purpose for wearing the mask was a consequence of the way members of Congress travel around the country and interact with people.
Understood. Fair enough. The White House and some conservatives have gone after Dr. Fauci, as you know, for what they say is him being wrong about the virus in the past. But let's listen to some of the president's past statements.
A lot of people think that goes away in April with the heat.
It's going to disappear. One day it's like a miracle. It will disappear.
And we're prepared and we're doing a great job with it. And it will go away. Just stay calm. It will go away.
So those are just a few examples. Given the inaccuracy of the president's past statements, is it reasonable for the White House then to throw shade on Dr. Fauci and criticize the CDC?
I think that the president's prediction ultimately will come true. Matter of fact, if you look at the recent announcements from the National Institute of Health and Moderna, Inc., we now have the most promising candidate for a vaccine. So I think the president's point is that the coronavirus isn't a dynamic that we'll be dealing with forever, that ultimately we'll find a solution. And until we do, the federal government has to provide provision for our people. And we also have to ensure that there's sufficient guidance so that we can grapple with this disease.
Yeah, just to be fair, though, that first soundbite was that he thought that it was going to go away in April, and clearly it hasn't.
I'm sure we all wish that it would have gone away in April. The president is often an optimist and hopes for the best, but here we've also prepared for the worst by ensuring that no American that needs a ventilator doesn't have a ventilator, and that we're engaging in the type of cooperative collaboration so that we can develop these vaccines. The fact that we've got over 100 vaccine candidates and one that will be given to 30,000 Americans soon to potentially block the virus is very promising and hopefully gets us back to normal, just as the president had hoped.
And just yesterday, Dr. Fauci said that the public should trust respected medical authorities, and he's one of them. Who are you turning to at this point for your guidance?
We get guidance from Dr. Fauci, from Dr. Birx, from our state surgeons general, and even down at the local health, at the local county level here in Florida, we have public health officials who help aggregate the data and contact trace. One thing that we've actually learned from the Department of Health in Florida is that these protests, while themselves in the actual outside active protesting may have some limited impact on the virus's spread, the activities that people engage in before and after the protests, where they're huddled up in an apartment making signs or maybe grabbing pizza after, really have contributed to viral spread. And so we hope that if folks are exercising their First Amendment rights to protest, that they aren't just wearing the mask during the protest, but they also engage in the right social distancing and the right preventative efforts both before and after.
And many states are certainly dealing with the economic fallout of scaling back their reopening. So does Congress need to provide more aid at this point to help state and local governments as well as businesses that are at risk of not making it through the summer? And what's the next step?
I know the administration is in active negotiations now with congressional leadership to try to formulate an additional package for the provision of the American people, our businesses, and any strained institutions as a consequence of coronavirus, including our local governments and our public health systems. But this is not a problem that just money can solve. We also have to have the right policies and strategies. One fix I know the Republicans are fighting hard for is to change the circumstance that allows some folks to arbitrage their unemployment benefits, where it's actually more advantageous economically for a worker to stay out of the workforce than to get in the workforce. So I know Republicans are negotiating for changes to those provisions of law so that we're able to get the right incentive for people to get back to work if it's safe to do so.
Let's turn now to the Black Lives Matter movement. Since the death of George Floyd, of course, we've seen massive protests taking place across the country. Recently, a couple in St. Louis pointed guns at protesters, prompting you to post on Facebook saying, "In Joe Biden's America, your job is illegal. You're locked in your home. Borders don't exist. MS-13 lives next door. And the police aren't coming when the mob arrives. This is all of us." So do you think that that couple pointing guns at peaceful protesters is the best depiction of all Americans?
Well, you've mischaracterized the photograph. I don't see them pointing guns at any other people. I see them standing outside of their home with firearms. I don't see any humans that they're pointed at in the photo that I posted. But I certainly think that there's a dynamic in our country where regular Americans feel like Democrats are trying to pass bills so that police won't arrive. And if they do arrive, that they won't get out of their car and engage in proactive policing. That's not just my critique. That's, in fact, the critique of Rahm Emanuel when he was saying that some of these reforms could potentially limit the ability to have proactive policing. So I think that was the point I was trying to make. And gosh, when you look at Joe Biden's open borders policies and his desire to, I think, make our communities less safe, it's certainly a fitting critique.
And lastly, you've also said that you're concerned that some activists want to, quote, replace America. I know you've raised concerns certainly about statues of founding fathers like George Washington being threatened, but let's focus squarely on the Confederate symbols and statues. Why do you believe that they should remain in public spaces? And recently you referred to it as cultural genocide. Do you still stand by that?
Absolutely. I think that there is an effort right now to fundamentally change America by making us not love America. And that I'm speaking directly to the desire to tear down George Washington and Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass, even, for goodness sakes. But to specifically answer your question about Confederate generals, it's important to understand why those statues were erected in the first place. They were put up as an act of reconciliation after the Civil War. Now, obviously, there were some terrible circumstances that occurred after the Civil War, but when we look at the fact that we actually did stitch our country back together, we are one nation now. There is not a divide between the North and South in America. And when you compare that to civil wars that have occurred throughout the globe, I'm actually pretty proud of the American reconciliation process. So I don't view these statues or these names of bases as testaments to the human beings themselves or even particular moments in time. I think they do mark a historical event of reconciliation and of binding the country back together, and I think that's the appropriate context to view these statues. If you look at the Jefferson Memorial, I think you've got a perfect example about how to memorialize the good work of a man, but also to reflect on the fact that Jefferson was a slave owner and that he understood the fundamental inconsistency of slavery with American way of life. I think he said slavery was like holding the ears of the wolf, where we could neither ride her nor let her go. So providing additional context at any historical monument is good, but trying to whitewash our history and tear down our statutes, I think deprives us of an understanding of what it took to unify our country after the Civil War.
But I am just curious. We just had the ancestor of Robert E. Lee on recently, and he said that he could understand that there's a painful past, hurtful, some ties and associations and connections with some of the Confederate statues and names. Is there any compromise, or you say to the people who find that offensive, deal with it?
No, I think that the compromise is to add to our history and to enrich our understanding of cultural events, not to act as if they did not occur. And of course it's the case that in America's past there are moments that bring pain to our current understanding of our country and our values. But that very thing could be said about literally any other society in all of human history. There has never been a gathering of humans over a long period of time where there have not been bloody, unfortunate, catastrophic, and tragic events. That doesn't mean you forget about those events. It doesn't mean that you act as if they didn't occur, but you do try to always strive to be a more perfect union. That's what our founders understood. So as we strive to that greater perfection, we shouldn't erase our history. We should seek to better understand it.
Congressman Matt Gaetz of Florida, we thank you so much for your time and for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.